Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's 12:31, right? It's the weekend mode. So this is what is the extra minute I gave you. Welcome to our final plenary session. It is entitled Revolutionary Ukraine, A History and Politics of Hope. Even though it may be impolite to introduce the Notre Dame colleague featuring in this session first, I cannot resist but point out that this session is chaired by Jim McAdams, the William M. Scholl Professor of International Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. Jim has served for 16 years, as many years as the eras of Chancellors Helmut Kohl and Angela Merkel, as director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. He has basically built it. During this time, Jim had the prophetic vision to establish the Nanovic Institute's Catholic University Partnership in 2004, partnering Notre Dame with the Ukrainian Catholic University, among others. Since then, we have a strong and stronger relationship with UKU, thanks to Jim, the architect of this friendship. Could we please take a moment to recognize Jim? Please feel free to stand up. We would not be here without Jim. I have to finish that. Thank you. Thank you. That was moving. Jim will show his many qualities by moderating this final plenary session with 3 exceptional guests. Emily Janelle Justice, the director of the thematic Contemporary Ukraine program at the Ukrainian Research Institute, Harvard University. Emily is a social-cultural anthropologist who has conducted research in Ukraine since 2012 and is the author of Without the State, Self-Organization and Political Activism in Ukraine. Welcome, Emily. Sophia Wilson, a professor of political science at Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, is the president of the American Association for Ukrainian Studies. Sophia's book, Maidan, Ukraine's Democratic Revolution, is forthcoming with McGill University Press. Please buy it, read it, and talk about it. In 2024, she was honored by the Ukrainian government for her contributions to Ukrainian studies in the US. Welcome, Sophia. Father Yuri Shurko is Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy and Theology at the Ukrainian Catholic University since 2019, having just been reappointed in 2024. So is either an exceptionally gifted academic leader or just a person who cannot say no. As an ordained priest, he combines his academic work with pastoral ministry and a family life, as he is married and the father of 4 children. He is a renowned biblical scholar and is the founder of the Department of Biblical Studies at UKU. During the 2025 spring semester, he's serving as a Nanovic Institute for European Studies visiting scholar. There are rumors that his Lenten resolution is to wear colorful ties more often. Welcome, Father Yuri. Finally, we also have an invisible participant whose contribution will be read by Jim, Professor George Liber. Cannot be with us. He's a professor emeritus of history at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Dear Jim, if I may please turn things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Clemens. I'm not used to being compared to Angela Merkel and the other guy, and so Cole, but I am honored to be compared with her. So first of all, let me say this. I'm so proud of Notre Dame, and particularly the Nanovic Institute, just to have you as a presence here, and to be talking about Ukraine, to be talking about things that really count in this world. And I just could not be more proud. So, but first of all, a round of applause for everybody from the Nanovic Institute for making this possible. So I'm going to say a couple of words just to put our panel in context, and I will keep them shorter than our panelists. So, hope. But where do we find hope? What does hope look like? What has occurred to me in listening to all of you is that the most important thing is to recognize that we need to look for hope at all, that we need to even look for it. And I think, thinking about my own country, this is a problem. Americans, it seems to me, are like sleepwalkers today, moving through time and space, assuming that everything will work out, and basically taking life for granted. For Americans, hope is like, I hope I win the basketball game the Irish are playing today. Or, as a scholar, I hope people will like my books. But this is self-delusion, masking itself as hope. because in our orderly lives as Americans, we have an epistemological disadvantage, to borrow and modify a term from liberation theology, a disadvantage in that we do not know that we do not have control over everything in our lives. We do not have control over the world, even though maybe some people would like to think that we do. We take our good fortune for granted. As I was listening to all of you, I couldn't help but think about how much the importance of looking for hope is about or caused by a shock where human beings are knocked off their feet and forced to look at a system, to look at themselves, to look at the human condition in a new and frequently painful way. And so, particularly as my good friend Boris Gudziak was speaking, I couldn't help but think about Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus is taking a little trip. Everything's fine in his life. He's a wealthy aristocrat, maybe persecuting some Christians along the way. And then he's like hit with a blinding light. He's hit with a blinding light. He falls and he can't see. So what is Saul's challenge? Thereafter is to look for hope. That maybe something as mundane as that he'll be able to see again. And increasingly he gets to see, but he sees in a new way. I don't know if Americans are going to experience this kind of shock, but if I had to bet, I would say, well, very close to certainty. I think we will experience it. But again, to return to our panel today, and to return to an idea that I've always come back to every time I go to Ukraine or to other Catholic universities, that is, once we start to realize we need to look for hope, where do we look? Well, we can look to Ukraine. Ukraine that has experienced so many shocks over so long a time. We can look to ordinary people. We can look to our friends. We can look at the lives of human beings in Ukraine, and we can see what it means to have experienced repeated shocks. Because for me, Ukraine is the example for us, not vice versa, where the affluent, the wealthy look around us, these buildings. It's grandeur, but it's delusion. So therefore, it's appropriate that we now look back at the end of a conference, but looking for hope, with a political scientist, an anthropologist, a theologian, and also an esteemed historian, George Liber, who couldn't be with us today, suddenly and unfortunately. And so I'm going to start reading from George's paper, and then I will go to Father Yuri, and then to, you guys got to make sure I've got this right, Emily, and then to Sophia. Now I become a panelist. Is this streaming, by the way? Yes. Because, good, because yes. I was, well, no, I was hoping George could watch it, presuming that I don't mess it up. George's paper is entitled Moving Toward Independence and Decolonization, 1985 to 2004. George starts. Today is the 1,108th day of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. When Russia launched its invasion, very few people expected Ukrainians to mount, as George emphasizes, a fierce civilian resistance. Certainly not Putin, and certainly not many or most of Ukraine's Western friends, understood all of the ways in which the people of Ukraine had changed politically and psychologically since Gorbachev came to power 40 years ago. And until push came to shove, maybe most Ukrainians, I'm modifying it, George, maybe most Ukrainians did not either. So here George pauses for a few thoughts. History, he observes, is the study of how people and societies change over time. Most people in most ages embrace unspoken assumptions, unconsciously engage in normal routines, and rarely adapt to new circumstances. With the emergence of mass politics after the French Revolution, more people became involved in politics. External factors such as wars, natural disasters, economic crises, those shocks I was referring to, challenged their unspoken assumptions and their political inertia, igniting radical shifts. This often led to chaos and mass psychological disorientation. And George says, dazed and confused. And here I immediately wonder, does George like Jefferson Airplane? If any of you can relate to this. Dazed and confused, men and women search for new certainties, seeking to create a new normal. History, then, is the story of how men and women seek to create a sense of certainty for themselves, their families, and their societies. In order to do so, people need to make choices from among their limited options presented by the convulsive changes they encounter. They hope that the choices they've made will bring them a better future, a new normal, leaping blindly into the unknown. Oh my God, there's Saul again. They have no guarantees that their hopes will bear fruit. So George asks, what is hope in this context? People define hope in different ways, and we cannot accurately measure it, but hope is more than just wishful thinking. Inspired by Václav Havel, let me define hope as an active effort to create a better future in solidarity with others in a hostile environment. I love the word solidarity. In the Ukrainian context, hope demands action and represents resistance to the status quo. This hope for a better future and search for certainty has fueled the history of the world, especially after World War II, humanity's most brutal conflict. Between 1945 and 1991, over 80 of Europe's colonial possessions gained their independence and joined the United Nations as sovereign states. I love that number, 80, remarkable. Then, in April 1974, the military coup against the Portuguese dictatorship unleashed what Sam Huntington has called the third wave of democratization. Then, this third wave inspired the revolutions in communist East Europe in 1989 and accelerated the pace of Gorbachev's chaotic reforms in the USSR, which led to Ukraine's independence. At the start of the 21st century, the third wave also inspired the color revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan. We at the Nanovic Institute have a special relationship with the Catholic University in Tbilisi, so it's important also to think about what's happening in Georgia right now. During the late Gorbachev era, in the first 15 years of independence, Ukraine's political leadership and people moved slowly not only out of the Soviet orbit, but also the Russian one. Mass support for the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity, the mass opposition to the Russian annexation of Crimea, the subsequent Donbass War, and Putin's full-scale war built on these foundations. Most importantly, each of these conflicts transformed the people of Ukraine from subjects of history into historical actors, historical actors. That seems so crucial for me. Each undermined the communist legacy, decoupled its citizens from their Russia-centered world, and helped to decolonize their minds. Each accelerated the development of political and significant and civic identities in Ukraine, increasingly at variance with others in the post-Soviet space. Between 1985 and 2004, investigative journalists, historians, and others created new narratives and histories, including one distinguished historian here, which challenged the Soviet version of the past. New accounts of the mismanagement of the Chernobyl disaster, the Stalinist purges of Ukraine's political and cultural elites, the Crimean atrocity of 1944, and the Holodomor created a division between Ukrainian and Russian perspectives on the past and promoted new political options in the present and future. These crises, which erupted between 1985 and 2004, raised important questions which were only provisionally answered before the Orange Revolution. From 1985 to 1989, variations of the most important question dominated the public sphere. What kind of Soviet Union would emerge? And then what kind of Ukraine? What did Gorbachev's slogan, "A strong union with strong republics," mean? What role would Ukraine play in a revamped USSR? With the East European revolutions of 1989, what kinds of post-Soviet future would Ukrainians embrace? These questions were first raised by Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, and Georgians, especially after the March 1990 parliamentary elections. They responded by demanding independence from the USSR. Ukraine's independence arrived in December 1991, but without a revolutionary break from the past. Despite euphoric expectations, the new citizens of independent Ukraine encountered one disappointment after another. Independence failed to inaugurate a clean sweep of the past. By controlling the state bureaucracy, the former communist elite played a role in the new Ukrainian society. The old elite's authority dwarfed that of the many newly established but ultimately weak political parties. This, in turn, created a dysfunctional parliament, which could not check the subsequent accumulation of power by Presidents Leonid Kravchuk and Leonid Kuchma, leaders who failed to introduce a substantial and coordinated set of democratic and economic reforms. Hyperinflation, underemployment, unemployment destroyed the old social contract and undermined each Ukrainian citizen's sense of security. With independence in 1991, new questions rose to the surface. What kind of future for Ukraine? So two sets of subsidiary questions emerged. What form of government? What kind of relationship with Russia? First question, within Ukraine, what kind of government? Democracy, but what kind of democracy? Representative, parliamentary, mixed, strong presidential? What kind of economy? What kind of capitalist order? How much of the old Soviet social safety net would remain? Multinational Ukraine or an oppressive nationalizing Ukraine? Inclusive Ukraine or divisive Ukraine? What would be the role of the Ukrainian language? The second set of questions were just as important. How close to Russia? How close to Europe? How close to the West? How close to the EU, to NATO? Although the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada's Declaration of State Sovereignty proclaimed a neutral, non-nuclear Ukraine, could neutrality encompass EU membership? George says, I pose these questions as stark contrasts, as black or white futures. These questions may lie at opposite ends of the political spectrum, but the possible answers contain at least 50 shades of gray between them. Now George turns to 2004. By 2004, the compromises the National Democrats hampered out with Kuchma in the 1966 Constitution, began to unravel. Although Ukraine presented a Ukrainian face with Stechne Smerla Ukraina, hope I got that close, its national anthem, trident, blue, yellow flag, and commitment to maintain Ukrainian language as the country's only state language, it had become a semi-authoritarian country with a ravaged economy, a sharp contrast to Poland, even the Russian Federation. Most importantly, by May 1st, 2004, all of Ukraine's Western neighbors, with the exception of Moldova, and we should, by the way, all watch out for Moldova, joined NATO and the EU and became integrated into the most important Euro-Atlantic institutions. By 2004, Ukraine remained the largest country between Russia and the expanded and integrated Europe. The primary question after the spring of 2004 became, why not Ukraine? Why could Ukraine not join a democratically and economically vibrant Europe? The hope to do so, hope propelled the responses to these crises which erupted after 2004. Ukraine's internal dynamics and Russia's response to them created the crises which erupted after 2004. They also propelled the creation of a unified Ukrainian response to them. This resistance represented hope in action against authoritarianism at home and Russian colonialism imposed from abroad. But the foundation of this hope started to percolate in the 2 decades before 2004. However positive, past performance is not indicative of future results, but the performance of Ukraine's engaged citizens over the past 4 decades has crossed a point of no return. The struggle for democracy and human rights and decolonization has attracted a mass numbers of men and women who have empowered themselves to make their own decisions and to act upon them. The idea of an independent Ukraine is no longer a minority faith. Despite its dire situation today, an independent Ukraine will not be canceled. Now, I'm assuming George is watching and streaming, so thank you very much, George. And now we'll turn to Yuri.
Glory be to Jesus Christ. Your Eminency, dear Professor Sedmak, dear honored and esteemed colleagues, to begin with, let me express a big gratitude to the possibility of being visiting scholar this semester in Nanovic Institute for European Studies and Institute for Social Concerns. It's a big opportunity for me, and I'm thank you for this possibility. As I started to discover on Thursday that there are too many smart people in the room, I decided to read my paper, but suspecting that you may fall asleep, I will use small presentations that you have work, to do. So, how it works? No, it's okay. So, why Ukrainians strive for peace and never lose hope? Like other nations, why have Ukrainians so desperately longed for peace throughout centuries and rejoiced at the declaration of independence in 1991? At its core, this striving for freedom is a striving for peace. When this place and the dignity it brings was threatened, why did Ukrainians rise, resulting in the Orange Revolution of 2004-2005, and then again in the Revolution of Dignity in 2013-2014? Why does Ukraine aspire to be a part of the Western world? How it works? Oh, okay. Why in the face of the terrible Russian invasion, when even the greatest sympathizers of our struggle for peace said we would hold out for only a few days or weeks, did Ukrainians not break but bravely stand in the fight for the fourth year now? Why has such a brave standing awakened solidarity and increasingly courageous support from Ukraine's Western partners? Why do seemingly strangers who have never been to Ukraine and societies located on the other side of the planet allocate significant resources to support Ukraine? Why do our European neighbors, such as Poles, and not only them, with whom we have, to be honest, had numerous disputes throughout history, provide us with unprecedented support and showed admirable solidarity? What drives such small countries as the Baltic states when they so generously help Ukraine? Estonia, one of the smallest countries in Europe, does not border Ukraine. However, it allocates more than 1% of its GDP to support Ukraine and promises to give a quarter of all funds earmarked for its defense to protect Ukraine. I'm more than convinced that some reasons lie on the surface, but the main ones can only be seen in the light of God's revelation. Neither the desire for independence nor the long resistance to Russian aggression can be trivially reduced to geopolitics or similar rationalism. We are dealing with something more than just a desire for political freedom. There are two different approaches to understanding history. One of the best known scholar of modern or our times, biblical scholar, Nicholas Thomas Wright, once said that we tell stories to understand the world and ourselves. Today, those who live in the Western world most often speak of two main stories: secular or modern, and biblical story. Okay, finally found it. The secular modern story tells us everything arose from the Big Bang and moved toward a better world through evolution, technology, and progress. The two world wars in the 20th century and now Russia's invasion of Ukraine strongly calls this optimism into question. Human confidence that only humans determine their destiny first turns into confusion and uncertainty, and then gradually develops into tension and fear. If in the Enlightenment, after the French Revolution, Western people proudly believed that nothing was impossible for them, then the horrors of First World War and then the crimes of the Nazis during World War II led many thinkers to assert that absolute truths do not exist. Since the concept of sin was not part of this story, the tension and diversity of statements in this paradigm only increased. Christians tell a completely different story, the biblical story, from creation to new creation. This story can be conveyed as a drama with several acts: creation, fall, Israel, Christ, church, and new creation. So what is the biblical framework, the story from the creation to the new creation? The biblical narrative begins with God's creation of the wonderful world and humans as a pinnacle of all creation, whom God creates in his image and likeness. Then the fall occurs. People decide that they want to establish what is good and evil, breaking their relationship with God and distorting their lives. Despite human sin, God immediately promises the coming of the Savior and calls Abraham to form the nation of Israel to solve the terrible problem of sin. Instead of becoming the solution, Israel, as I guess any other nation would, becomes part of the problem, and prophets announce the coming of the servant of the Lord, who will take upon himself our pains, which we may find in the book of Isaiah, and the Son of Man, whom we may find in the book of Daniel, who will establish God's kingdom. These promises are fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth, through whose life, passion, and resurrection, God gives salvation and new life to the whole world. Jesus Christ establishes the church, a place of the new creation, which will find its final fulfillment in his second glorious coming. This simple and many times heard biblical story creates a vital framework from the world's creation to its restoration in the new creation. And what is most important, and why I'm telling this so simple story for you, is because we are included in this story. We are included in this history. And theologians call it so-called eschatology of cooperation. Since we are waiting for this new creation, we may actively participate or just watch. The state of the created world depicted in the two first chapters of the book of Genesis and the state of the renewed world presented in the last two chapters of the book of Revelation can be described by the one word, peace. In Hebrew it sounds shalom. So the most important statement for today, peace, shalom, is what we always desire, what we longing for, what we fighting for, consciously or unconsciously. The Hebrew Bible's principal word used to express the idea of peace, shalom, it's word common to more than 70 Semitic tribes. And the word's root means to be hale, whole, complete, content, happy, perfect. It's almost impossible to translate in any modern language. Peace is not simply the absence of war, it's a positive notion with its own content of wholeness, health, and completeness. When, through the fall, humans lost this state of happiness, fullness, they began to seek and desire it and continue to do to this day. One example found in the Middle Eastern greetings. When people meet each other, what they say? They say, Shalom Aleichem, peace upon you. But more precise translation would sound like, may you be well. Like it's this wishing to somebody to be whole, complete, with sufficient physical and spiritual resources. To this day, people in the East congratulate each other by wishing peace and express the desire to die in peace. As God promised to Abraham, you shall go to your fathers in peace. One of the most important themes of the Bible is the covenant. We know Old Testament or Old Covenant, New Covenant. And what is interesting is that it is often described as a covenant of peace. In Hebrew, Berit Shalom, which contains the idea of reconciliation. First of Israel with God, and then of all people through Jesus Christ with each other and with God. Even in the most challenging and dark pages of the Old Testament, like the book of Judges, it's strange pages. When you read it, you feel a little bit shocked how it can be part of the Word of God. But you may find a very nice description. Who is God? The Lord is peace, is said in the chapter 6. And the Messiah in the book of Isaiah is called the Prince of Peace. And finally, we see that the Prince of Peace will restore the original paradise, will bring back this peace. The state of peace in the Old Testament is associated with justice and truth. It's parallel terms. Hebrew shalom, mishpat, tzedakah, and emet. It's parallel terms. When I speak about God's order, Hebrew uses the word tzedakah. And this tzedakah translated into our language like, in English, like justice, righteousness. But when we want to know what is tzedakah in its essence, tzedakah means like, or represents God's order. And the result of this God's order is peace. In fact, peace is a result of justice. The New Testament, especially the Gospel, tells us how this peace is given to us through Jesus Christ, who establishes justice on earth through his sacrificial law. When we read the epistles of the New Testament, apostles begin and end their epistles with a mention of peace and develop the theology of peace, indicating that their mission is a ministry of reconciliation. So, how hope is connected to peace, you may ask? The most simple and understandable theology of hope is the hope is a longing for peace. It can be conscious or unconscious. Hope is our deep inner motivation to work to establish justice on earth and thus peace. Biblical hope is the expectation of attaining a desired outcome coupled with trust in God. The Hebrew Bible conveys the idea of hope as something which we can translate just by the word wait. What we are waiting for? We are waiting for a peace. Hope originates with God, is based on his calling as is facilitated by Scripture. Hope lives deeply in the heart of Ukrainians. Remarkably, in the Gospel, which are permeated with this theme of hope, this concept as known is not used even once, and only 5 times as a verb, with only 2 instances carrying explicit theological meaning. Why am I mentioning this? Because of even the last book of the Bible, book of Revelation, which was written as a message of hope for or to persecuted Christian, does not have any mention of hope. It's implicitly present in this book. This absence is profoundly significant. It shows that hope is not always mentioned explicitly in the Bible. Still, it is always implicitly present and undercurrent throughout Scripture. God has placed hope in the human heart. That is why Ukrainians stand and fight, not all because of reading the Holy Scriptures in this way, but mostly because they are created in God's image, because the Holy Spirit acts in the heart of every person and encourages them to search for something pure and authentic. We call it holy. This implicit hope for peace lives deeply in people's heart, especially in Ukrainians who fight for their freedom and independence. The hope for a just peace lives in the hearts of all people with a healthy conscience, believers and non-believers alike. It cannot be hidden in formulas or exhaustive concepts. This hope, this longing for true shalom, for wholeness, justice, and peace, is the reason for Ukrainians' resilience, courage, and struggle. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Thank you so much to everyone who has been able to stick around for the last panel. And as sorry, we did switch order. So if you could put thanks. I know, Sophia and I are so similar, but we aren't quite the same. Thanks. I just wanted to say, as someone who organizes a conference, congratulations to everyone here at Notre Dame, and thanks for all the work that you put into this event. This conference, of course, as we've heard, a lot has been about hope. It has been recognized that there are so many Ukrainians who have done superhuman work amid the conditions that I think should be unacceptable to everyone, but that are sadly currently being entrenched by our own president. It seems that we've come to accept that Ukrainians are superhuman. For 3 years, we've been hearing stories of everybody fighting against all odds for Ukraine. These are the stories that give us hope. But these stories are also what makes it difficult sometimes, at least for me. I did research in Ukraine with leftist, feminist, and student activists in 2012, 2013, 2014, and beyond. They stood on Maidan in 2013 and 2014 because they hoped that they would be part of building a democratic future in Ukraine. And now they're either on the front lines as Ukraine's defenders, or they're fundraising for those defenders, or they're delivering humanitarian aid to frontline communities. So how do we remain hopeful when we no longer feel that we have the freedom to choose our own future? The activists that I worked with would rather be planning protests and opposition campaigns, and they'd rather be building a community of like-minded people. And instead, they're being asked to put their lives and their plans on hold so that they can fight for Ukraine's right to exist. And they do it because they know what is at stake. So I have hope for Ukraine's future because I think Ukrainians, maybe better than anybody, know that democracy is an active process. And that's what inspired the paper that I'm talking about today. This paper makes an argument that Ukraine's Euromaidan and Russia's 2014 invasion, followed by the full-scale war, should prompt us to rethink nation-building, citizenship, and democracy, which have been major concepts in social science in the field of Ukrainian studies. I was also really inspired last summer by teaching in our summer program at the Ukrainian Research Institute. My students were deeply engaged with this question, and they were asking what kinds of theories we have to understand nation building in Ukraine today. And it also, I would say, gives me hope that Ukrainian studies is in really good hands in the future. So discussions of Ukrainian nationalism have been a dominant component of Ukrainian studies, most notably the tension between civic and ethnic nationhood, which, to put really simply, whether Ukrainians consider themselves Ukrainians because they're Ukrainian or because they live in Ukraine. This has motivated a lot of scholarship in this field. Scholars of a civic national identity document Ukraine's regional, linguistic, and ethnic diversity to show how Ukrainians of many different backgrounds and practices all consider themselves to be part of the modern Ukrainian nation state. These approaches encourage us to think about how contested national existence sits within long-standing academic studies of nations, nation building, and nationalism. Benedict Anderson's notion of a sovereign nation as a so-called imagined political community in which, quote, the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. This still stands as one of the most referenced definitions of the nation. Most usually, the idea of imagined is what gives Anderson's concept such longevity, but what I like to pick up on here is the idea of community that has the most relevance for Ukraine. The nation is, quote, imagined as a community because regardless of the actual inequity and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. The notion of comradeship and that the nation is based on imagining oneself as part of a community of comrades is precisely the process that was articulated by the 2013 and 2014 Euromaidan participants. One clear example of this is the slogan, I'm a drop in the ocean, which was created by artists who were working in Kyiv in 2013. When I was doing my fieldwork in Ukraine in 2013 and 14, I saw this slogan everywhere. Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa, I'm sure all of you probably saw it too. It evokes the notion of self-organization or samoorganizatsiya, the notion that if something needs to be done and someone can do it, then they should simply do it. This self-organization is positioned outside of the state, so it effectively criticizes the state in ways that political parties and institutions cannot. In my book, Without the State, Self-Organization and Political Activism in Ukraine, I look at how self-organization became increasingly effective during the 2013 and 2014 protests, and therefore how the protests became detached from existing political parties, which enabled self-organization to become the driving force behind participation across political ideologies. The self-organized mentality drove the mass protests and helped protesters establish their activity as political while not being connected with existing parties and institutions. This slogan, "A drop in the ocean," encouraged people to think about what skills or abilities they might have that they could bring to Maidan so that the protest camp could be sustained by protesters alone without the influence of political parties. Seeing one another come together despite the huge variation in political ideology united people at the protest camp, even if support for the protests around the rest of Ukraine was divided. So I want to give an illustration of this way that self-organization worked to kind of remove political ideology from the equation. And something I go into a lot more in my book, but I think the best example of this is Varto u Likarni, which is the hospital guards, which was an initiative that was established in response to the crackdown on protesters that were being arrested from hospitals or forced to sign confessions from hospitals. So basically, when protesters were attacked, they certainly would be taken to hospitals for treatment. This is especially in January and February of 2014. From the hospitals, the police would often follow protesters to the hospitals and then force a confession, force some kind of arrest. And so it was actually leftist activists who came up with the idea to go either with the ambulances or wait at the hospitals so that when protesters were taken there, somebody could act on behalf of the person who was in the hospital, many of whom were unconscious, right, or concussed or deeply injured. These activists were of a variety of political positions, the initiative was established, not just to be inclusive of people from one political position, and it was also established to encourage those who were unwilling to participate in the violence that was happening, and this was really key. This idea of solidarity ran really deeply through the initiative. Maidan supporters who wished to avoid violence, as I said, were motivated to join Varto because it was obviously a contribution that was necessary for the protesters' needs. In many protests, people joined because this is something, in many protests, especially over the course of Maidan, people tended to join because they knew somebody else who had joined. This was true in the case of Varto u Likarni. A lot of people signed up because they knew somebody else who had signed up. But the broader motivation to participate in this initiative was about helping people that one did not know, but whom one knew that they shared certain values for standing against autocracy. So this is the type of initiative where I see the idea of an imagined community that was being built on Maidan. People who volunteered as guards did not need to know the people that they were protecting. They could just imagine that they held the same values, and that was enough for them to believe in the rightness of their actions. Solidarity between strangers was what helped set these protests apart. People were willing to take huge risks that were ranging from arrest or expulsion or bodily harm and death for people that they did not actually know. All they knew was that they believed in the same thing, which was democracy in Ukraine. This is something that I have found has extended deeply since 2014. It started after the first invasion in 2014 and has gone, I think, even at a greater scale in 2022. And I want to tell a short story about one of the activists that worked with me on this project, Irina Voloshina, who is the architect of the choral performance last night. We were talking about my research, and it turns out she went to elementary school with this person, and so I felt like it was a good idea to bring him into the room. His name's Fedya. So this is a person who I met in 2012. Absolutely Russophone, convinced he did not speak Ukrainian, strong leftist. When I talk about leftists in my book, I make the really strong point that leftists mean it's a very broad spectrum of people, right? We're talking about social democrats, we're talking about anarchists, we're talking about socialists. Fedya, we would call a communist. He definitely held onto these very strong beliefs. And I met him in the time when he was studying Marxist theory. In 2015, Fedya volunteered to serve in the ATO. This was something that prompted a really strong rethinking among leftists about what on earth a leftist anti-war position might be. Fedya was one example of several leftist activists who began to volunteer. And the conversation was, aren't you serving the state that you've been criticizing all this time with your work? And the activists like Fedya said, but I can't let people die. If I don't go, people will die. And that was all the motivation that they needed. And I personally argue and think that this is deeply connected to self-organization. If you can do something, your job is to do it. And these are people who did it. And that is why I think this idea of an imagined community in Ukraine, it's not just about, I'm Ukrainian, I speak Ukrainian, I was born in Ukraine. It's about wanting to be part of the nation. And Fedya is somebody who chose to be part of the Ukrainian nation and chose to use his actions to build that nation state. After the full-scale invasion started, sometime I think in March of 2022, he was the main actor in a fundraising video where I heard him speak Ukrainian language for the first time. And I also think, we can talk for days about whether or not speaking Ukrainian makes one Ukrainian, but it was something that deeply moved me. It felt like yet another choice to be part of Ukrainian nation building. So I tell Fedya's story, and I am wrapping up, I do have one more minute. I tell Fedya's story not because I think he is necessarily emblematic, but because I think most of us have a story like this. And I think when we put all these anecdotes together about how people on a day-to-day basis are choosing to be part of Ukraine, I think it tells us something new in terms of our concept of what a nation is and what citizenship is, and therefore what democracy is. So I think this effectiveness of the post-Maidan imagined community is essential to understanding Ukrainian resistance to the full-scale invasion. It helps us explain why leftist activists are mobilized and motivated to fight on behalf of Ukraine. LGBTQ people, who as yet do not have the same civil rights as their fellow citizens, are volunteering on the front lines. They're serving just alongside far-right activists who previously threatened them physically and assaulted them, not because everything is forgiven, but because it's impossible to fight for a better future for Ukraine if Ukraine does not exist. Thank you.
Sophia.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much to Notre Dame University, to Nanovic Institute and all the organizers for bringing us together for this conference, because I felt not only we were learning a lot, this was a healing process, because we were here in solidarity, surrounded by people who study Ukraine and who know that Ukraine matters. In fact, I couldn't not draw parallels with the solidarity movement in Poland when during the darkest times, Catholics and non-Catholics would go to Catholic church because they knew they would be around people who get it. They knew they were around people who knew that things are really wrong, but they had hope together that things are going to get better. In fact, when I was preparing my remarks, I had to rewrite because I was so inspired by so many of you and I wanted to incorporate and engage with that. I was asked to talk about hope and human rights. But as a human rights scholar, that means I study human wrongs. And as a scholar of Ukraine, I now study Russian war crimes. Helena Kruk, among her wonderful poems she read a poem devoted to Victoria Amelina, who collected knowledge about Russian war crimes. Helena wrote, "Běži, sestro," but can she run? She no longer can run because she became a victim of one of the many attacks that became systematic attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Olesa Khromenchuk, she mentioned amazing Alexandra Matvichuk, who became the Nobel Prize winner for peace, and as the Ukraine Civil Liberties Center now, they're committed to collect all the knowledge, or collect information about Russian war crimes, and it's tens of thousands of war crimes that are even impossible to list, even when we start talking about the types of crimes. They include possibly every horrible things that humans can come up with, from murders to massacres to rapes of infants. So when you learn about that, where on earth do you find hope? Most of the times I begin to feel completely hopeless. But I agree with James and I agree with Emily. When we want to find hope, we look to Ukraine. I would say we look up to Ukraine. When I was conducted interviews with fascinating people who took part in the Maidan revolution, one of my major questions was, why did you do it? And so I asked this pediatrician turned revolutionary, why were you here? Why were you risking your life? And she said, let me tell you a story. So things got worse, people were being hurt, and we put an announcement on Facebook, please, we really need painkillers. And we got so many, we got boxes and boxes from businesses, people, we didn't know what to do with those painkillers. But it was then an old granny came up to me and she said, we heard the announcement, and here's the box. I'm sorry, I already started them. But this is all I have. And I'm telling her, no, come on, you need that. We have so much. Look, we have so much. And the granny said, don't take that away from me. This is my contribution. Please let me do it. When UKU rector, Taras Dobko, he talked about Maxim Butkevich, an extraordinary person, who survived so much. It's even really hard to fathom how much he survived. And when you look at his pictures, when he is there, when we can't even imagine the torture he was going through, just the way, right, the dignity on his face. The question is, why did they do that, right? How did they make through that, through those risks? And of course, the answer is hope. They were hoping for something, but did Maxim hope to go home? If he simply wanted to go home, he wouldn't have volunteered on the first day of the full-scale invasion. He would have stayed home. He was hoping for something much more. He was hoping, as well as Maidaners, for peace through justice. They were hoping for a just system. One of the Maidan activists who also became a strong critic, a very open critic of Russian invasion is Joseph Sissels, who is the leader of all Jewish organizations, the association that holds them. He was also a Soviet dissident, and one of his most fascinating stories that he told me was him in the Soviet prison. He was there for criticizing the Soviet regime. And 6 months before his term expired, the Soviets came to him and said, hey, we have good news. You can leave. All you have to do is to sign this document to say that you're wrong. And he said, no, I'm not signing that document. Because he had hope that there will be justice. And that is why he's doing there. He's not doing it just to be free. He's there for justice and freedom. When lawyers who, during Maidan, they were in courts and they were challenging the state that was simply beating people and throwing them in prison with 2-minute trials, they told me they knew they would lose every single case. But their job there was not to win an individual case. Their job was there to send a message to the state that this is wrong, this is unjust. When the state offered amnesty, the people said, no, we're not taking that, because that means No matter how benevolent, you're still a dictator. And that means that all people who were thrown in prison are still considered criminals. And it's just dictator who gets to decide. They were fighting during Maidan as well as they are fighting and risking their lives now to live in a system of justice. Archbishop Gudzak taught us that forgiveness matters. Forgiveness and Christianity and we all humans, we need to think about forgiveness. But Archbishop Gudzak also told us that two things are not the same. One does not equal one. And I'm not a theological scholar, but may I say that sin does not equal joy. It's the learning from sin that might bring us joy if and only if we learn what is right and what is wrong. That is the only way forward. And as perhaps forgiving and generous Americans were when they were helping to rebuild German and Japanese democracies after World War II, there were also Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals that very clearly said what was right and what was wrong. I have good news for you, and I want to end with that. History is complex, full of nuances, but it's also stubborn. And it teaches us that any empire or any authoritarian state within Ukraine, if they attempt to break Ukraine or repress Ukrainians, they bring their own demise. Hitler ended up with millions of Ukrainians fighting against the Nazis. Bolsheviks tried really hard. They murdered and they starved and they almost even succeeded convincing Ukrainians they're doing it for their own good. But as Kathy Warner taught us, it is the disillusionment with that system that reminded Ukrainians that they are much better off in a system of justice without repression. So why is it, though, that we don't know about this? So much of these amazing, inspiring stories about Ukraine, and I think the answer is so oddly simple, is because even despite the Cold War animosities, what we ended up is swallowing a Russian imperialistic pill that told us that Ukraine doesn't matter, that Ukrainians are insignificant. So there's more good news, and that is Notre Dame is opening this wonderful Ukrainian Studies Hub, and this is where people are going to learn more about Ukraine and support the idea, as Ukrainians do, that justice and human rights matter, and that's what we all need to fight for. Thank you very much.
I'm sure our Concertmeister is going to say there's no time for Q&A. 10 minutes. Well, okay. I never know, so we're free. 10 minutes. Yes.
Thank you very much to all the presenters and for reading the paper by George Liber. Another piece of good news. I presented about the sociological miracle of Ukraine compared with Belarus and Russia. A few weeks ago, we were at the conference was organized by UKU and Notre Dame on religion and war in Munich, parallel to the Munich Security Conference. There was Alexandra Matvichuk and Irina Shcherbakova. Both received the Nobel Peace Prize in 22. One for the work of Berlin Memorial, which is in Berlin and cannot be in Russia, gathering the war crimes information in Russia. And the other was the very, very uphill, the very uplifting presentation by Irena. By Alexandra. Irena was completely hopeless. No hope for democracy, no hope for civil society, no hope in Russia. and there is a lot of hope. So yes, we are gathering crimes, and this is very hard for human rights people that actually are studying human wrongs, but we are studying human wrongs in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are doing it, and they are not doing it in Russia. So this is a piece of good news. Not good news for Russia, of course, but it's good news for those who care for those issues. So.
Thank you. Questions? Oh, way back here.
Thank you to all of the panelists, and thank you to all the panelists. I have to admit I was holding back tears for a lot of that panel. And my question is to Emily. As part of our Ukraine on Campus program at Razum, we've seen a lot of really incredible student groups in the United States act as sort of lightning rods for this self-organization, doing everything from, dressing up as Zelensky at the Oval Office, cheeky things like that, to organizing meetings with war crimes researchers, survivors of genocide at their universities. My question is to you, as a bridge for a lot of these activists in Ukraine, also a lightning rod for them in your studies and advocacy. How can folks here at universities in the States beyond plug into that self-organization energy and opportunities in Ukraine and here and change things?
Should I go ahead or should we take it?
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alexa. I really did want to include my students' contribution to that paper because this was one of the most vibrant and genuine discussions about Ukraine and the nation that I think I was really sad it was only in my classroom, honestly. And so I think two things that are really key for answering your question. The first one is that those of us in this room who are faculty, we have I'm not exactly faculty, but I'll say we have an obligation to help students who want to study Ukraine to study Ukraine. The number of students in my classroom who were Ukrainian studies students who also said they were the only ones at their institution and they were fighting tooth and nail to get any Ukrainian classes, that is going to do more damage to Ukrainian studies in the long run than anything. The students are there and they're interested, so we need to do everything possible to advocate from our institutions, especially this, the more funding is cut, the harder this is going to be, but we really have to stick with it. And I think Sarah Phillips already left, but people like Sarah Phillips who are getting all these other universities to invest in Ukraine to make sure Ukraine has a presence on campus, that needs to be an example for the rest of us. So, not just teaching Ukrainian studies classes, but also encouraging other faculty to teach Ukraine in their classes, I think is a good way to help get people interested. And then the second thing I think is more this kind of self-organization part, which is, what do I have the ability to do? And students on campus, again, the atmosphere on campuses is very scary right now, and I really feel that for them. I feel that for us too. But what they can do is make noise about what matters in the world. Our students at Harvard did an amazing vigil and memorial on the anniversary of the full-scale war, and it's basic stuff, right? It's bringing stories to people who haven't heard stories from Ukraine. They can start with things that they already know how to do, and then hopefully build bridges with faculty, with organizations like AAUS, and hopefully kind of create something sustainable where the faculty also do their part to support Ukrainian students who are advocating for Ukraine and students who are from Ukraine. I think there's a lot of potential to build there. So thank you for the question.
Sophia, do you have any thoughts?
I think Emily did such a good job.
Okay.
But I think, yes, absolutely. It's working together and doing everything that we can to work together and to learn from Ukrainians and their activism, because their skills are in many ways unparalleled.
And here is a question over here.
Hello, thank you very much for such interesting presentation. Follow up on Alexa's question. So how to build more engagement from Americans, because it's, considering the political situation, it's harder even, and there's like still some Americans don't know history and they don't understand why US should help Ukraine, right? And there's so many questions. But my question to you all is, so how to advocate for in society with those people who are in between, not for Ukraine, but not for the Trump currently, let's say that way, and how to convince them that, oh, this is why not just because of the history, but something else. Thank you.
Can any of you solve this problem?
I can start,
Yeah.
and just sort of, it can seem as a very daunting task, right? But there's something very interesting historically if we look. In the 1950s, America was very anti-Semitic and very strongly anti-Irish. And not only beliefs, but there were practices of discrimination that were severely affecting people's lives. And so what was happening through the decades, and especially after World War II, is the stories that people built, that people brought with them. It's personal stories about the Holocaust. It was personal stories and the families and what the Irish brought in their knowledge about the famine and continuing discrimination that many experience in their families. And it's those connections, those human connections and that communication. And I would say, no, it's not only whether, it doesn't matter whether who they support politically here in America. We are all humans, and we all, not only that we should care, but we all deep down care. And while it can seem very daunting, our job is to keep going, even when it seems that we are not heard, because we need to remember that when it comes to truth, it takes decades. When it's false, it might take a minute for this to be spread and to be believed. But when it's truth and when it's these tough stories, it takes decades. So that is something we have to keep in mind, that it doesn't mean we should stop. On the contrary, we have to keep going and talk to everybody.
I'll add something to this too from the classroom. You know, so it's simply a matter of focusing on Ukraine. Here I'm building on your points. Rather, it's a matter, well, in part, in thinking about our past. And Americans do not like to think about their past. We're a people who we just don't like to confront our past very much. And so in the classroom, one of the things that I try to do with my students is to get them, just in a very personal way, to think about how the past, how their families' past have shaped who they are. We're at a university, Notre Dame, that was produced in part as a response to anti-Catholic and anti-immigrant sentiments. That is what this university is rooted in. And so I think as educators, that's what we need to do, is to develop a mentality among our students so that they will reflect on something more than just what they read in the news or some politician says.
Thank you.
So now the Concertmeister finally shows up.
Applause, applause. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe you want to sit down. Thank you.
Yes, we'll sit down.
No, we have 15 minutes. Dear all, as we bring this conference to a close, and before I give the word to Rector Taras for 6 minutes, I would like to express a word of gratitude. So I would say a few words, Taras will say a few words, and then I will make a few announcements and then wrap us up. Express a few words of gratitude. Gratitude and hope are deeply connected. Some people may think that gratitude looks towards the past and that hope looks towards the future. But gratitude is a source of strength for our today and our tomorrow, and hope is also a way of remembering the past in a healing way. Gratitude and hope are connected because they both are based on a recognition of goodness. Gratitude is the virtue of knowing that one has been gifted with something good. Hope is the virtue of expecting goodness from something to come with roots in the present moment. It is a difficult world we live in. One may doubt the goodness of humanity. Bringing good people together, knowing about a person's commitment to dignity and the common good is a source of hope. You may remember that I mentioned at the beginning of our conference, the point of this conference is basically the structure of a speech act. By exploring hope together, we want to cultivate hope. By exploring hope together, we want to cultivate hope. This is how I feel right now. Inspired by our friends from Ukraine, I'm grateful for the hope I have been given, hope for Ukraine, but especially hope from Ukraine. We heard from so many testimonies of resistance and resilience and selfless service that no occupying power based on only power can break that. Hope for our partnership and our work together. This hope is a source of gratitude, and this gratitude is a source of hope. In other words, the expression of gratitude is an expression of hope. I want to thank all of you for your presence and your many contributions, your relatively acceptable time discipline, your patience with us, as some things may not have gone according to plan. Thank you for your service to hope. A profound word of gratitude goes to a few people I need to mention by name. Thank you to our friends from the Ukrainian Catholic University, Archbishop Boris, Taras, Volodymyr, Sophia, and your leadership. In his that was the least you could do. I agree with you. In his second part of the Summa Theologica, question 17, Article 1 response, as you know, Aquinas famously characterizes the object of hope as a bonum futurum ardum possibile, as a good that lies in the future, is hard to achieve but possible. This is to a certain extent also the case for the object of gratitude. When we planned this conference, we were planning a good that was in the future, possible, but hard to achieve. A bonum ardum needs many hours of hard work, many hands, enormous amounts of talent, and a lot of goodwill, and God's grace for sure. My dear colleagues at the Nanovic Institute have worked wonders, not only in the past 3 days, but in the past weeks and months. So let us please recognize, in alphabetical order, Becca, Grant, Jake, Father Jim, Keith, Mel, and Morgan. Could you please come up? Where's Morgan? Where's Morgan? Morgan and the baby. You have no idea how many last-minute changes there are and how many last minutes. Hospitality must look effortless. And it did, thanks to my wonderful colleagues. Believe me, many efforts went into this event. So I have a bag for each one of you. They look alike, but they are individual. Maria, would you be so kind and just try to make sure, that each person gets the one? And thank you again so much. We lost Keith, we lost Morgan. And Morgan has a baby in her womb, so we lost 3 people at once. Thank you, friends. Thank you so much. Thank you. The gratitude for this event is connected to the hope that the Ukrainian Studies Hub will flourish until we see each other again 2 years from now for our next conference. Maybe we'll be able to see many fruits and friendships. Now I would like to give the word to my friend and mentor, fellow pilgrim, and tall brother, Taras.
What a fascinating conference. What a beautiful conference it was. It was about academic exchange of ideas. It was about artistic celebration, about making friends, about praying together. So I would like to thank all of you, everybody, for your contribution, academic, artistic, spiritual, physical, for any contribution which made this conference a success, which made this conference a blessing for all of us. But especially I would like to thank to Professor Clemens Sedmak and to the team of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies for their generous friendship, for your inspirational solidarity and commitment to Ukraine, for being so hopeful about Ukraine's future. Our conference brought a lot of hope to rely on and to act on. And by the way, one more linguistic observation from Ukrainian language. For English word reliable in Ukrainian language stands надійний, which stems from nadia, hope. So reliable in Ukrainian is connected again with nadia. One can rely on hope and its promises. We had so many signs of hope, heard so many testimonies of hope during these 3 days. And really, we just, I think, have to be attentive enough to see these signs because they are many. Many sessions reminded me about my, experience in Ukraine. And especially, for example, it reminded me that in Lviv, for example, for the last years, at least 3 art galleries were established, during the war. That it is difficult to get a ticket for theater performance, during the war. So theaters are full. That new bookstores are being opened, and that the book industry is thriving, during the war. I think there are many, many more signs of this hope. And we have heard that we need also a politics of hope, which is essentially politics based on Catholic social teaching, church social teaching, because I think hope is an antidote against politics of grievances. And of course, I'm very concerned about Ukrainians adopting victim-based identity as a result of accepting an unjust peace deal. So as you can imagine, there could be many people who, already there are some people who could have a feeling of being betrayed. And I think that only politics of hope could be really an antidote against this development. I would like also to mention one very practical thing. So I think this conference also will build, into the future. And already there is a program, faculty collaboration grant program going on at the University of Notre Dame, which is open till March 18th. And this program accepts proposals for joint faculty research projects between Notre Dame and UKU faculty members, projects with the potential to both achieve international recognition and to generate sustainable research projects in the future, which covers many topics that we discussed during this conference. So about what makes democracies resilient, how religion can play its role in bringing Ukraine for its hopeful future, about how to deal with trauma, both individual and collective trauma, and how to achieve individual and collective healing, about security, its moral and religious dimensions. I think that, programs like this really are helping to establish in Ukraine, establish a deeper interest, for Ukraine, and also to show that Ukrainian experience could be valuable for addressing global issues. And also, it's a kind of instrument, or it's a format, it's a model where we are moving from supporting individual, Ukrainian scholars that were displaced by the war, and moving to a model of academic collaboration which aims at designing joint long-term research projects with institutional profile and with institutional potential. I'm really grateful to the University of Notre Dame for this example, which I think will be very efficient and very important for the future of the Ukrainian academia. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nanovic. Thank you, Clemens.
I want to end with announcements, a quotation, and then ask Archbishop Boris for a blessing as we walk further as pilgrims of hope. The announcements: Oksana has lost her phone. Oksana, right here in the back. So if you stole her phone, please bring it back. If you found her phone, please, if you have not found it yet, please try to find it. No, very sorry. So Oksana is looking for her phone. That's all I can do at this point, right, Oksana? Yeah. Should we call it? Does it have a name? No. Okay, I hear you. Yeah. At 3 p.m. this afternoon, which is in 1 hour and 2 minutes, we will have a screening of the film Porcelain War in the Department of Performing Arts Center, the Browning Seminar. Prior to the screening of Porcelain War, Professor Ian Coit will present a special Revolutions of Hope Filmmaker Award honoring the extraordinary work of Ukrainian Catholic University MA student, I will slow to that, Snezana Guzarevich, for her forthcoming feature film Flowers of Mars, which has a 2026 scheduled release. Attendees will watch an early trailer of the film. So that's 3 p.m. where we were yesterday for our cultural night. At 5:30 p.m., following the film event, we will offer a liturgy, a vigil mass in All Saints Chapel in Jenkins Nanovic Halls, which is the building where you would find our institute, and the building just across the street from the Department of Performing Arts Center. 5:30 p.m. vigil mass, which counts as Sunday mass. And also for the Europeans, the US will change their time this night. So they will steal an hour from us this very night, just that you know. Because, I don't know about that, because Europe is changing much later. All right, so these were my announcements. It's 1:59. The final words from me. We have made it a custom to end all Ukraine-related events after February 24, 2022 with these words. On the day of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, our then university president, Father Jenkins, issued a statement where he said, "Our friends in Ukraine are in need of healing and hope. We at Notre Dame stand in solidarity with all peace-loving people worldwide in demanding an end to this invasion of a sovereign nation. This unprovoked war is an international abomination and must stop now. Until it does, may God keep safe all of the innocent men, women, and children who are currently in harm's way. The prayers of the Notre Dame family are with them. With these prayers for peace for Ukraine, we from the Nanovic Institute want to wish all of you safe travels and a good future. Dear Archbishop Boris, may I please ask you for an Episcopal blessing as we leave."
If I could ask Brian Kostanko to come up, Olis Kuzma. I don't know if Father Yuri is here. Andriy, yeah, grab a microphone. There's a fifth one. If maybe some of our female singers would like to come up, because I'd like to engage you in this final moment. Just grab those microphones. Yeah. Dear Clemens, dear Father Jim, I ask you to pass on our great gratitude to Father Robert Dowd and Father John Jenkins, and we thank
Jim McAdams, and everybody who you represent and who you have led and who you lead. You just quoted Father Jenkins, and some people who read that text or heard it 3 years ago are no longer with us. In our families, in our university communities, there are those who stand above us now, which is, I think, the perspective of hope we have. And the biggest question for intellectuals, for simple people, for every human being is the question of life and death. And so the blessing that we receive today is the blessing of life for all our family members, departed and present, for all those who defend dignity and have made the ultimate sacrifice for it, for this whole university community and all the communities that are represented by the participants. There is a hymn that represents the greatest hope, the triumph of life over death. In English, the words are as follows: Christ is risen from the dead, trampling death by death, and to those in the tombs granting life. So we'll do a little disruption here. We're going to anticipate what we will sing universally in 40 days, 41 days. But I want to ask our singers to help me bestow this blessing, this final blessing. Christos voskres iz mертвих, смертю смерть подолав, і тим, що в гробах життя дарував. Христос воскрес із мертвих, смертю смерть подолав, і тим, що в гробах життя дарував. Христос воскрес із мертвих, смертю смерть подолав, і тим, що в гробах життя дарував. І нам дарував життя вічне, поклоняємось Його древному воскресінню. God bless you all.